We're living in an incredible age of photographic technology at the moment, where the sensors that we use are so cutting edge that there's very little basically between them. This means that the edge that you're going to get when you are creating films or trying to shoot cinematography, or even stills for that matter, comes down to the glass. The glass is super important. Glass is so important that directors in the filmmaking industry know this so well that they're prepared to put down budgets of $200,000 just for the glass itself. Which is what brings me to today's video, where I am looking at a particularly different set of glass that purports to essentially punch above its weight in terms of cost and ability when you're creating film. Welcome back today. I'm Emil, to those of you who are new to this channel. Predominantly, I am a stills photographer. But out of necessity, I've had to pivot over the last couple of years, and I'm now shooting a lot of video. So I was pretty excited the other day when I got the opportunity to test out a set of lenses that have taken the industry a little bit by storm recently. And these are the, let me get this in focus, Nisi Athena Lenses. This is a set of micro cine lenses, or as the industry is kind of alluded to, budget cinema lenses that have surprised quite a lot of photographers and videographers alike as to their ability and their cost. I was given the opportunity to use them for a week, courtesy of the distributors in South Africa, Landscape Gear, along with a Sony A7S Mark III, courtesy of Sony South Africa, who lent it to me for the duration of a small mini documentary project that I was shooting in the north of Zululand. I'm still working on the project, so it's going to be a while before it gets published, but this is my take on these lenses as I had the opportunity to shoot with them. Before delving into the Nisi Athena lenses though, it makes sense to first look at what exactly a cine lens is, particularly if you are a follower of mine and you are a stills photographer, which means that the concept of cine lenses may be a little bit new to you, possibly. So what exactly is a cine lens? The easiest way to look at cine lenses is to look at their three core differences with stills photography lenses. The first one is the big elephant in the room, and that's the fact that just about every cine lens out there is manual focus. There is no autofocus on these lenses, so whether you are buying a super expensive Arri Carl Zeiss or a Canon lens, which is supposedly on the budget end of the spectrum, you are going to get a manual focus lens. There's a good reason for this as well. Cinematographers want to have nice clean pulls rather than that very quick jump that autofocus lenses have. You can imagine cinematography scenes where you have a focus pull from one person to the next object in the background or another person, and it's this lovely smooth pull from foreground to background potentially. Autofocus, which is the mainstay in stills photography, needs to be super slick, super fast, and well, almost instantaneous in fact. You can't do that in cinematography, which uses the focus pull for narrative effect. So by and large, cinema lenses are manual focus. The next defining factor around a cine lens has to do with the focus as well, and that's the fact that all cine lenses have these geared teeth on the focus ring and on the iris ring itself. And if it is a zoom, it also has a geared ring around the zoom pull as well. The reason for these geared rings is that the entire lens gets set up on a focus pull system. This is a geared system that can either be run by a focus pull operator by wire, so there is actually no linkage between the focus puller and the camera itself apart from a digital connection, or it can be run with a rotating dial that runs in a different direction to the actual focus ring itself, because it's easier to be able to set focus points and to be able to create focus pulls when you're actually shooting. So by necessity, all cine lenses have geared focusing rings as opposed to a nice smooth rubberized finish. That doesn't mean you can't use stills cameras in the same setup, and a lot of old manual focus lenses are essentially converted to cinema lens, like this Canon FD 50mm f1.8. I have added a rubber ring to it that has the teeth on it so that it can actually be used on a focus pull system if you need it to. Still cameras also have their aperture set in increments of 1/3 stop usually. Although these lenses do have 1/3 stop increments on them, they're all smooth so that you can create fade-ins and fade-outs, and you can change your the transmission of light without actually making any physical sounds that you would usually have with a stills camera. Now you can obviously get stills cameras de-clicked, but usually when you have an old manual focus lens like this one, you will hear the aperture being changed with a rundown through the clicks, where obviously all Cine lenses are de-clicked, so that when you turn it, it's just silent, apart from hitting the stops at the end. Then there is the build quality and the heft of a Cine lens, which also sets it apart from stills photography lenses. Cine lenses are heavy, they're chunky, they're made of predominantly steel or other metal components and have very little plastic and carbon fiber inside them. Unlike autofocus stills lenses, which are very lightweight nowadays. I mean, if I look at the Canon CN 35mm T1.5, that lens weighs 1.1 kilograms. The Canon RF 35mm f1.8 lens, on the other hand, weighs 300 grams. So there's an 800-gram difference between the Cine version, which is a manual focus lens, and the stills lens, which is an autofocus lens. Coupling in with the weight is the fact that Cine lenses tend to all come in a set or a series of lenses. So if you look at the Canon CN set, you've got a 85, a 50, a 35, a 18, I think, and a 135, and all of those lenses are more or less the same weight, but importantly, they're all more or less the same size. And the reason behind that is so that your camera operators can shift out lenses without having to change matte boxes. And if they're changing it onto a gimbal system as well, you don't have to rebalance the gimbal system every single time you change a lens. So it's very important that Cine lenses within a set all stay more or less the same physically in terms of size and weight. And then there's the last defining feature of a Cine lens, and that is that we don't look at them in f-stops in terms of how much light gets transmitted through the lens itself. We look at it in t-stops. Now, a t-stop stands for a transmission stop, whereas an f-stop stands for a focal stop. And essentially, they're the same thing, except an f-stop isn't a theoretical number, while the transmission is an absolute number. So when you see a lens with a t-stop value on it, what it's basically saying is that there is an exact transmission of light of 1.9 based on a f-stop lens which has a theoretical transmission of light of 1.8 or whatever it happens to be on the lens that you're using. This is super important for cinematography because, again, when we are changing lenses on a film set, you need to be able to make sure that there is the exact same exposure in terms of the transmission of light coming through the lens, whether you're using your 35mm or your 50mm. So it becomes critical that the lenses themselves have the absolute same transmission, and which is then indicated in t-stops as opposed to f-stops. Okay, so that's the background of Cine lenses out of the way, except for one minor caveat, and that is also the cost. Cine lenses are by and large eye-wateringly expensive, and I mean like eye-wateringly expensive. If you look again at the Canon CN series of lenses, which, as I said, are more on the budget end of Cine lenses, the 35mm T1.5 retails in South Africa for around 78,000 Rand. So that's around $3,000 just for a 35mm lens. That, bear in mind, is manual focus. It doesn't have autofocus, it doesn't have image stabilization, it is a simple manual focus lens. Then let's jump to the Carl Zeiss Master Cine lens, which was built in conjunction with ARRI, and that 35mm T1.3, which admittedly is slightly faster, but that lens retails for around $14,000 for one lens. It's a pretty impressive lens, and that lens set, so the Zeiss Cine Masters, were used filming The Life of Pi, Skyfall, and The Imitation Game. So you can see that directors put a lot of sway on the glass that is used in filming their productions. Part of the reason why these lenses are so expensive is that they have to be really, really good lenses when it comes around to things like chromatic aberration, which has to be very minimal. The control of flare has to be fantastic. Not necessarily gone, because you do still want to have flare inside your shots in moving video. It's one of the reasons why a lot of independent filmmakers like using old manual focus glass, because this allows them to add character to the images themselves. Stills cameras, on the other hand, require absolute perfection from the glass itself. So when we look at a Cine lens, you might find that its color is not necessarily interesting in the sense that we talk about Sony or G Master glass or Nikon glass, but it is very, very sharp, and it doesn't have CA or terrible flaring. And that's partly where the cost comes in, is that the glass has to be so good. The other thing is that the glass tends to be slightly larger because some of the lenses have to be used on things like VistaVision cameras, which have a wider format than conventional 35 or super 35mm sensors themselves. So essentially, when you buy that lens can actually have a larger image circle. Okay, so that's what the Cine lenses are in comparison to a stills camera lens that you would buy from any of the camera manufacturers. Now we get to introduce the Nisi Athena lens set, which is by and large a bit of a game changer when it comes to creating independent films or even high budget films because of the quality that you're getting out of these little pieces of glass. So let's start with the concept of little piece of glass. Nisi markets the lenses as a micro cine lens. Now, the reason why they're calling it a micro cine lens is because they are significantly smaller than the competition. Every single one of the lenses in the Nisi Athena lens set weighs more or less the same, and that's around the 890 gram mark. Bear in mind, I've just mentioned that the Canon 35mm was 1.1 kilograms. Their 50mm is 1.3 kilograms. The Nisi lenses are all slightly smaller and quite a bit lighter at 890 odd grams. That weight can change ever so slightly based on the lens mount that you choose. And the lenses do come in a range of Sony E, Canon RF, Leica L, which is the same as Sigma as well, Fujifilm GFX, which is interesting, and of course PL mount, which is the cinema industry standard. Coupled to that, of course, is that Nisi also have a PL mount adapter. So you could actually just buy this lens in PL mount and adapt it to whatever camera system you happen to be using, so that you can jump it between a PL camera or a Sony camera or a Canon camera or whatever camera you happen to be using. Still, 890 grams for a Cine lens is actually pretty light. It's not exactly throw all the lenses in your backpack and go shooting as a stills photographer light, but it is light for the cinema industry. Very light, actually, hence the term micro cine lens. If you choose any of the lens mounts except the PL, the lenses also have a drop-in filter slot, which means that you can add circular polarizers, you can add the 3 stops or the 6-stop filters. There are also black mist filters. All of those filters can be added inside the lens instead of adding it as a matte box on the front. I was personally using a Nisi Swift system shooting my documentary so that I could also get my shutter angle down to 1/48th of a second. Sticking with that whole theme of lightness as well is that because the size of the lens is relatively compact and light, it works really well on a gimbal system. And coupled to this is the fact that all of the lenses have their iris ring and their focus ring in exactly the same location, so that rapid change out between lenses is possible without having to change your matte box, your focus pull system, or any of the other kind of attachments that are going to go onto the lens itself. So the lens works really well for very fast changeovers if you need it to. Going into the actual focusing rings themselves, there is a super smooth, slick feeling to the actual focus ring itself. There's more of a drag on the iris, so there is a kind of physical differentiation between the two if you happen to be focusing or adjusting by hand, but that stiffness isn't so stiff that it won't work on a follow system that you've got it geared to. On that note, the irises themselves are marked in 1/3 stops, and you've got a nice throw of about, I didn't actually calculate it, but the throw is all the same on each of the lenses, and it's around 20 degrees throw, I suspect. The focus ring itself, though, all of the focus rings turn 300 degrees. Now, that's quite a lot for stills photography, which often has a change from infinity to closest focus in less than a quarter turn of the ring, whereas this one rotates 300 degrees. And it's one of the reasons why they're not necessarily suited to stills photography, but I will come back to that in a moment. Importantly though, all of the lenses have the same movement. So whether you're using the 25mm, the 35mm, the 14, or any of them, they all have the same 300-degree throw from infinity to closest focus. Closest focus on all of the lenses is actually surprisingly close as well. I've got the 35mm in my hand over here, and that has a 30cm closest focusing distance, which is pretty close for a 35mm lens. The lenses also have almost zero focus breathing. This is the problem you sometimes see with certain stills lenses, is that if you were to do a focus pull, it looks almost like a crash zoom, because essentially the focal length of the lens is changing ever so slightly as you change your focus from infinity through to close focus, or vice versa. With the Cine lenses themselves and with the Athena lenses, there is almost no focus breathing. Certainly nothing that you're going to notice between focusing from the closest focusing point through to infinity. So the lenses themselves are essentially focus breathing free. One thing that you will find lacking on all of these lenses, but that would be the case with most Cine lenses, is that there is no electronic contact. So you basically have a dumb lens. If you want to have any kind of EXIF data in your image itself, you're going to have to input it yourself. I didn't do that while I was shooting my documentary because I was trying to make changes way too quickly between lenses while I was shooting independently as well. So I didn't have an assistant helping me on set or on the scene itself. To me, that's not a problem. You can tell the difference between the lenses visually when you're actually looking at the image based on its focal plane, but optically, on the other hand, they are all identical, which is really, really, really useful. The fact that they all have the same color, they all have the same kind of sharpness to them, and the depth of field as well. The only changes you're going to see are based on the focal length, not on the aperture usage that you're using. So that's really, really good that you can seamlessly use the different lenses and there is no visual cue that says, hang on, this person is using different glass. You can see there's a different focal length, but you don't necessarily tell that it is a different glass. Nisi are promoting the fact that it has such a high micro contrast, and certainly the images are tack sharp where they need to be sharp. But it's not that kind of hyper sharpness that you sometimes get with the modern mirrorless stills lenses. More you can see there's a high level of sharpness, but the actual overall color contrast isn't punched out like you will see with something like a Nikon 50mm, their Noct lens. In testing in the studio, I took some stills images to be able to see what the kind of color consistency was between the lenses. The color temperature between the lenses is basically the same. The 14mm might be a smidgen warmer. We're talking like 150 Kelvin to 200. Nothing that's necessarily going to throw the viewer out. So we're really splitting hairs if I say that there's any difference. In fact, the differences that I did see, if I did see any at all, could be more ascribed to the lighting that I was using in the studio as opposed to the glass itself. In a word, the glass is really, really consistent across the range. Coupling into the fact that there is so little sort of aberrations inside your image is also the gorgeous out of focus highlights that you're getting. Yes, I realize that it's an overplayed trope at the moment about having bokeh, which is amazing, but it does have really nice bokeh. And that's partly due to the fact that it has this really nice 10-bladed diaphragm inside there. I mean, if I open this up, you can see how it just lets in all of that really nice light. In fact, wait, let me show you on the 50 or the 85mm, because that's where it really looks, it shines. And here we go, there. Let me get that in there nicely, and we're just going to open up that iris. That 10-bladed diaphragm makes really, really nice circular patterns in the background. You're going to get nice smooth bokeh. It's not going to look jittery, and it doesn't have that weird sort of angular highlight in the background. So you get pretty clean, smooth circles with highlights that are blowing out. Of course, the other thing that you can use such a smooth iris for is fade ins and fade outs. So you can fade out to black very quickly by simply turning your aperture ring down to 22. The range itself, when Nisi originally brought the set out, it came with 5 lenses. So there was a 14mm, a 25mm, a 35mm, a 50mm, and a 85mm. All of those lenses except the 14 are T1.9, while the 14mm is T2.4. Subsequently, Nisi have added 3 new lenses, an 18mm t1.9, a 40mm t1.9, and a 135mm lens. The 135 is the only one that's slightly different in terms of weight as well, and that's out of necessity simply because it is significantly larger due to the fact that it has more glass inside it. If you buy the full lens set, it comes with a really useful Pelican style hard case with nice inserts inside there. Your lenses are not going to get damaged. And there is an additional lens slot there for a 6th lens if you would like to purchase another lens, or if you even have another different branded lens that you're going to slide into that case itself. It's a pretty useful way to carry the gear around, which brings me to the price. Now, remember when I spoke about Cine lenses, I said that they were insanely expensive, like seriously expensive. These lenses are not. If you look at the individual lenses, they range from around 26,000 to 30,000 Rand per individual lens. Now, your stills photographers are going to sit there and go, "Are you mental? That is a lot of money to spend on a stills lens." But bear in mind, all of the features around that lens for cine work still make this significantly cheaper, sometimes up to 10 times cheaper than the alternative lenses that are out there. Then you can actually go ahead and buy the lens as a set. So the full 5 lens set costs 127,000 Rand. So effectively, you're almost getting one lens free by buying it as a set. The full master set retails for around 196,000 Rand. That's for the full 8 lenses. I'll put the dollar value up in the corner over there. Bear in mind that 196,000 Rand is almost the equivalent of what it would cost to be able to rent a set of Panavision lenses in dollars. So as a result, the Nisi lenses are a lot cheaper than the other lenses on the market, which is one of the reasons why independent filmmakers have taken to them so rapidly, because you're getting incredible image quality, amazing specs and usability out of these lenses, but at a fraction of the cost of the alternatives that are on the market. Let's talk image quality for a second. The images are super sharp. There is a wonderful sharpness that's happening inside the frame itself. And the other interesting thing is that the glass itself it's casting an image circle that is actually larger than 35mm format. In fact, it's big enough that it'll fit on a Fujifilm GFX camera. So you can use these on your Fujifilm GFX 100 if you want to. This means that it's the same size as VistaVision, which is that extra large film format. So these lenses are future-proof to a certain extent and have a far greater range of cameras that they can be used on, which is again, really, really useful. And another reason why they are potentially better than some of the other lenses on the market. One of the interesting things about having such a large image circle as well is that if you are using it on a full frame camera, you're essentially getting the sweet spot of the glass in the middle, because if you know anything about lens architecture, the edges are always going to be where you have the most aberrations or the issues with the lens itself, simply because that's where the light is bending at its most, or at least the refraction through the elements is at its most. So that's where you're going to see your worst CA. That's where you're going to get your worst distortion. That's where you're going to get batwing coma and all the other various optical nasties that happen to lenses. So by using a lens with a larger image circle than full frame on a full frame camera, you're getting the gorgeous part of the glass when you're shooting, rather than the nasties on the edge. Can't say the same if you're shooting on a Fujifilm, haven't been able to test it. What I particularly liked about the optical characteristics of the lenses though, was I didn't feel any concern shooting into the light. So I often had backlit subjects while I was shooting and doing quite strong focus pulls from chess pieces right up front all the way through to the background, and I never saw any noticeable chromatic aberration occurring on those dark edges between the bright highlights in the background and then the darker shadowed portions of the image in the foreground. That's pretty impressive, as you see that in stills photography, and yet I was able to get really nice focus pulls without any of those kind of distortions coming into the image itself while I was shooting. I also saw the same kind of quality when I was shooting into light sources, like this example over here of a vehicle just before a shoot that I was doing. While I was waiting for everybody, I did some quick test shots, and you can see that the flare itself is really nicely handled. It's attractive almost. So you have this really natural look into the bright lights themselves, and the fall off into the brightest section is natural. It's almost It's almost filmic, for want of better words. I've always thought that film has had a much more pleasant round off into a blown highlight than digital has. And it's a sort of a je ne sais quoi, but when I see the glass that I was using, I felt like it was reminiscent of that fall off. It didn't have that same cutoff that you see with some digital photography. So although you're shooting on a digital sensor, it is almost rounded out as if you were shooting on film. You'd have to try it to see it yourself, but it really worked beautifully. So I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. Finishing off, these lenses are super tough. Usually you worry if you drop a lens that you're going to break the lens. With these lenses, I feel like if you drop it, you're going to worry that you're going to break the floor. They are seriously tough. Again, because they are completely dumb in the sense that they have no electronic contacts, there's fewer things to break. There's a nice solid helicoid focus inside there, and in fact, looking at it, I can see that it's fairly easy to change the lens mounts themselves. I don't know if that's necessarily offered, but you can see how it was designed such that the different lens mounts can be switched onto the lens itself relatively easily by the manufacturer. Let's finish off with the fact that I'm a stills photographer primarily. Can you use these lenses for stills photography? The answer is yes, you can. They are really gorgeous lenses. They work really nicely. They're easy to manual focus. I mean, I was filming obviously with a screen, so manually focusing is really simple using focus peaking. But if you are just running in the field and you want to use the lens as a stills lens, yes, you can use it. Does that mean I recommend it? Hell no. If you're shooting eventing, let's say a wedding, or you are photographing for corporate or anything like that, the focus ring is too slow to turn 300 degrees. There's a reason why autofocus is king when you're shooting stills photography, because you're having to react really quickly. So if you're a landscape photographer and a filmmaker, this is fine. These lenses are fantastic. They're super sharp. They have minimal aberrations or chromatic aberration and flaring. So they actually have a really clean picture that comes out of the image itself. But if you are trying to shoot run and gun stills photography, they're difficult to use. If you're shooting run and gun videography, again, you're probably going to find a 24 to 70 millimeter zoom lens is probably going to be the better answer. But if you are shooting considered documentary work, corporate work that you can set up your shot, even documentary work where you are doing some kind of run and gun stuff, like I was doing shooting my mini doc, yes, these lenses are fantastic. And one of the reasons why they're so fantastic is because they have this signature look to them. They are gorgeous, in a word. They're wonderful looking through it. And certainly the team that I was with when we were reviewing the footage, they just kept on going, wow. And it's because the lenses just shine. They are fantastic lenses to use. That doesn't mean that they are run and gun stills photography lenses though. You can use them. You absolutely can, and you will enjoy using them as well. The fact that they're all the same size with the same filter diameter of 77 millimeters works for stills photography as it does for cinematography and rigging out a camera for a shoot. It's just that they are slower to use than using a modern 24 to 70 millimeter autofocus lens, which will basically cover most of what you're going to be getting out of the kit itself. If, on the other hand, you are an independent filmmaker, this is like a no-brainer. These lenses are fantastic. They elevate the quality of the footage that you're going to be shooting, and they set it into the realm of a higher budget production. So last year, the film that put the cat amongst the pigeons in terms of production value was The Creator. And the reason was because the cinematographers Oren Sofer and Grieg Fraser decided that they were going to shoot the bulk of the film on Sony FX3s. Now this is a surprising move because the Sony FX3 is really a prosumer camera. It isn't a high-end camera like, for instance, an Arriflex or a Bolex or even Reds for that matter. Now the reason they chose this is that they decided that the image quality was fantastic and the price was right. You could basically rig out 5 Sony FX3s, buy the equipment outright for 5 Sony FX3s with follow focus rigs, with Atomos recording devices and the lenses on the front and everything, along with a gimbal, for the same cost as renting a single Panavision camera. So it made sense. In a way, I think that the Nisi Athena lenses are to glass what the Sony FX3 was to the camera industry itself. It's allowing independent producers and filmmakers to create work that looks like it was shot on equipment that is way, way, way higher than their budgets would allow. Right, that's it. That's the Nisi Athena lenses, which I think were phenomenal. Fantastic lenses for their value. Really, really, really awesome to work with. I loved shooting with them, and I would happily pick up the set again to be able to shoot with. I strongly suspect that rental houses are also going to start using these lenses because they are just fantastic. That's my take as a predominantly stills photographer. I'm sure you're going to find other videos out there by dedicated filmmakers on these lenses, and I'm pretty sure they're all going to say more or less the same thing, that they are awesome. Thanks for watching. Again, as ever, if you have enjoyed it and you found this useful, remember to pop a like and a subscribe inside the video blocks around, you do that thing. If you enjoyed this one, please let me know, pop in the comments below. Ask some questions, I'll try and get back to you if you have any other queries around these lenses. Otherwise, until I see you on the next one, thanks again for watching and cheers.